Hello and welcome to this week's edition of MindWeb.com's Metals Weekly podcast. My name is Jeff Candy, and joining me on the line is author of The Morgan Report, David Morgan. David, if we look at where the silver market is at the moment, we're effectively, in terms of prices, at least in dollar terms, roughly where we started the year. But concerns about macroeconomic pressures in Europe and in the US have got up, if nothing else. Where do you see the silver market placed at the moment?
We're still in a long consolidation or basing pattern right now, and I feel it will probably continue for a little longer. I think that perhaps the bottom is actually in for not only the mining equities, which is probably the middle of May or so. I called that bottom, and so far I'm right, but barely. It looks like we might retest it. And it looks like the metals themselves have probably bottomed very recently, and it's too early to count that because, time will tell. But I think that we're actually going to work our way further up over the next several months. And by year's end, I'm looking for silver probably to be in the 35 to 40 range. And gold probably will be well above 1750, probably 18 to 1850 is my best take at this point in time.
If we look at the factors driving the market, there was an interesting report out of HSBC saying that investor sentiment is clearly going to be the swing factor, given perhaps the slowdown that we've seen on the physical side from industry and from jewelry as well. What is your take in terms of particularly the investment side of things? What would likely derail investment demand for silver at this stage?
Well, first of all, let me say that I agree that investment demand is the driving factor of both gold and silver. And on the industrial side, I agree that it has, fallen off measurably. However, I just put an alert out to our membership, and there was a recent report coming out of Japan that they're going to increase their solar activity a great deal. So solar may pick up more in the upcoming years than perhaps was projected earlier. But having said that, the sentiment right now is for safe haven status, and gold actually holds a much higher place in investors' minds than silver does. So to get silver moving again, I think gold is going to have to lead us up out of this basing pattern in a rather significant way, and I think then silver will probably follow it up. It's not always the case. Usually when these markets base and start moving back up, silver accelerates relative to gold, and that could happen. But I think gold is going to have to kind of give the big push before new investment starts coming into the silver market.
In terms of that investment demand, that sentiment, particularly the safe haven element of it, the query that's been raised a couple of times in recent weeks and months is the notion of the US dollar as the safer, or perhaps the better term is preferred safe haven over gold and silver, which has surprised a lot of people, especially given the amount of liquidity that's being pushed into the system. What is your view of silver and perhaps gold's role as a safe haven? And is that likely to become more of a safe haven than the dollar in months to come?
Excellent question. The ultimate currency is gold and silver. There's no doubt about it. We have 4,000 or 5,000 years of history that proves that. We also know from history that every fiat currency that's ever been attempted has failed. But as a practical person, probably 99% of the population doesn't even consider gold or silver to be an investment. And so everything is settled in some kind of currency, which is US dollars primarily, or any other currency on the planet. So because of that fact, whether in fact even a gold bug or a silver bug, if they had meet a margin call or had some kind of emergency medical expense or whatever, would have to basically cash out of that position, or some of it rather, and get dollars or yen or whatever and pay that. So the fact is that even though the dollar is gone down from the time of inception of the Federal Reserve in 1913, basically, the fact is that the dollar is a settlement vehicle that is used throughout all of commerce. And because of that fact, it's going to continue to have some merit for who knows how long. Regardless of that, the ultimate currencies are the metals. And it doesn't take more of a percentage of the population to wake up to that fact. In other words, the more the dollar depreciates, and it will, the more it'll wake people up to go into something that's working well against it, and that would be the metals markets. When you get in these lulls like we've had for about a year in gold, it makes people question their conviction. Well, it's true then, but maybe it's different this time, or it's true then and back a year ago, but now it's stopped, or the bull market's over. They start questioning their conviction. And once that takes place, then you just have to have new buying come into the market. And I believe strongly that it will, probably by year's end.
David, in terms of the manner in which people are buying silver, we saw an interesting report from ETF Securities stating that, interestingly, silver ETFs did particularly well in June and saw net inflows over the second quarter. Is this a market that you think is going to continue expanding, or are we likely to see a move back towards gold bullion coins and bars?
I think that the silver market is much tighter than most people believe. I mean, most people just look at the price, and based upon the price, they get a feeling that silver is, plentiful or what have you. The fact is that Sprott Asset Management came in with their PSLV, their physical silver trust, and bought about approximately $200 million worth of physical silver here very recently. I think that's another factor to my thinking and others, that perhaps the floor is in and perhaps the bottom is in. Sprott is extremely savvy about the silver market. He's extremely bullish about the silver market. And the last time that they made a purchase of that quantity, it moved the price up about $2.50 over a rather short period of time, being a month or two. I don't know if it's going to happen this time or not. Obviously, I'm watching the market carefully. The point is that the silver market seems to have become more of a safe haven status than it was, let's say, a few years ago. There are more and more people that are waking up to the fact that silver that has every quality that gold has, only sells for a much cheaper price. As people get squeezed more and more, but still want to protect whatever they have left, tendency is in the latter stages of a major bull market like we're experiencing, more and more money moves into the silver market rather than the gold market, because gold is so expensive for most people that they bypass it. Even though they might prefer to own gold, they'll move into the silver market. So what you said about the ETF is not a surprise to me at all.
David, just quickly to close off with, one would be remiss at the moment to talk about the silver market and not talk about what's been going on in the US with regards to the CFTC report, the probe into perhaps or the likelihood of silver manipulation. We're now expecting a report in September and October. It doesn't. There are a few people that are skeptical as to whether or not we're likely to see an actual report coming out then. But what are your views?
Well, my views are that there'll be a report. If it happens on time or not, I don't know. My opinion is that the report will probably allude to some misbehavior. I think it'll be extremely watered down. I think that there'll be some position limits changed that have absolutely no meaning in reality. In other words, that certain banks or certain hedges are allowed that really disrupt the market still. And so, excuse my skepticism, but I've been studying this stuff for over 4 decades, and I've looked at politics, government, money, monetary history, what happened at the end of these great fiat systems, and on and on. And I just can't see anyone standing up and telling the absolute truth that the silver market's been manipulated, and there's some banks that have been doing it, and we're going to really go after them. I don't see that at all. I see some kind of watered down version that appeases the public, and people that are in the mainstream media mostly will look at it and say, oh, isn't this is really interesting. Silver was manipulated, or whatever word they choose to use. And wow, we've corrected that problem. Now I'll move on. Where in reality, it's basically a whitewash. That's my strong opinion on it.
David Morgan is the author of the Morgan Report, and we'll have to look out and see what happens when the CFTC does release that. But as you heard it from David, it's not necessarily going to be what some people are hoping for. And that's it for this week's edition of MineWeb.com's Metals Weekly podcast. For me, Jeff Candy, thanks for listening, and please join us again next week.